Hello, everyone. Tonight, I'd like to invite you into a quiet moment. Just you, me, and a story that's been waiting in silence for a long time. Maybe you're watching this with a warm drink in hand. Maybe you're under the covers, letting the day slip away. Or maybe you're just looking for something. Something gentle, something true, something that will stay with you even after the screen goes dark. Wherever you are, whatever brought you here, I'm really glad you came. And if by the end of tonight you feel something, a pause, a memory, even just a flicker of warmth, then I hope you'll consider subscribing to the channel. You don't have to do it now. Just, if the story finds you and you'd like to hear more like it, you'll know where to find me. And while you're here, let me know in the comments, where are you watching from? And what time is it for you right now? I love seeing all the different lives this story reaches. It reminds me how small the world can feel when we sit down together like this. Now, if you're ready, I'd like to tell you about a man who said nothing before he died, but somehow left me everything. The house is quiet tonight. Too quiet. Not the peaceful kind of quiet, but the kind that wraps itself around you like fog. The kind that makes the walls feel farther apart and time stretch longer than it should. I'm standing in his study, the room he never let anyone else clean. The chair still holds the shape of his back. The window is cracked open, just enough to let in the wind. And the rain outside is ticking on the roof like it's trying to count the seconds he's been gone. He's been gone for 7 days now, and still not a single word. No goodbye, no explanation, no note hidden in a drawer. Just silence. And yet, what he left behind was louder than anything he ever said. And that's where this story really begins. He was never the same after January. It didn't happen all at once. There was no dramatic shift, no collapse in the middle of a conversation, no tears. Just a subtle dimming. A quiet unraveling only someone who loved him would notice. At first, I told myself it was just winter, the way the cold gets into your bones and makes everything feel heavier. He'd always been sensitive to the seasons. But this time, it felt different. Not just the weather. It was him. He stopped lingering in the kitchen with his morning coffee. Stopped humming when he watered the plants. Stopped sitting next to me on the couch after dinner. His presence began to hollow out. Some days, I'd find him in the backyard just staring at the garden beds, unmoving, like he was trying to remember something he'd buried years ago. I asked him once if everything was all right. He smiled, that soft, polite smile he gave strangers at the grocery store, then said, "Of course." And that was that. But I knew something was wrong, not because of what he said, but because of what he didn't. He started locking the study door, which he never used to do, and every evening he'd go in there for hours. No sound, no typing, just stillness behind a closed door. I'd knock sometimes, pretending I needed something from the bookshelf nearby. He'd open it with a kind expression, but there was always a flicker of guilt behind his eyes, like I'd caught him doing something he hadn't decided whether or not to confess. Looking back now, I realize he was preparing for something he couldn't bring himself to say aloud, something he wanted me to find. But only after he was no longer here to explain it. We'd been married for 24 years. We didn't keep secrets. At least, I thought we didn't. But in those final months, he became a ghost of the man I'd built my life around. Present, but already pulling away from this world. And what I didn't know then, what I couldn't know, was that he was putting something in place, not for himself, but for me. He may not have said goodbye, but slowly, silently, he was setting the stage for everything that would come next. It started with a drawer, locked, heavy, tucked beneath the bookshelf in his study. One I hadn't noticed before, because he never meant for me to. On the 8th day after his death, I finally stepped into the study with the intention of cleaning, or maybe not cleaning, just opening windows, letting the air move again, trying to unfreeze the space. I ran my hand along the bookshelf, brushing dust off the bindings. He was always meticulous. The books were still arranged by author, genre, and size, because he liked things to make quiet sense. And then I saw it. A drawer I'd never used, set lower than the others, almost hidden in the shadow of the wooden frame. It had a tiny brass keyhole, no handle, no label. At first, I ignored it. There were condolence letters on the table, half-drunk cups of tea left by visitors, and casseroles I couldn't bring myself to eat in the fridge. But that drawer kept pulling at me, like a held breath. Like a door in a dream you're both afraid to open, and desperate to. I found the key 3 days later, taped inside the back cover of one of his oldest novels. He knew I'd find it eventually. He'd underlined the final sentence on the last page. Some truths are quiet until they are ready to speak. The drawer clicked open. Inside were letters, neatly stacked, wrapped with a red string that looked like it had been tied with great care, or regret. Some were addressed to me, others, to names I didn't recognize. A few had no name at all, just dates. The handwriting was his, but smaller, tighter, almost like he'd written them while holding his breath. I didn't open them right away. I just sat on the floor, holding them in my lap, trying to make sense of the weight of paper, trying to imagine the moment he'd written each one, what he'd felt, what he couldn't say to my face. Eventually, I picked the top envelope, the one with only my name, and a date, January 14th. The letter inside wasn't long, but every word landed like a stone in still water. There was sorrow, and something close to apology, but more than that, there was intent. He hadn't left a note when he died, because he'd been writing them for months, tucking them away, preparing for something I hadn't yet seen. And this was just the beginning. The garden was the last thing he touched. I realize that now. In those final weeks, when conversations became clipped and his eyes often drifted away mid-sentence, he poured himself into that backyard with a kind of quiet urgency. Every morning, just after sunrise, I'd hear the back door creak open, the soft drag of his boots on the path. Even when frost kissed the grass and the sky was still the color of ash, he'd be out there, digging, tending, planting. I thought it was just distraction, a way to feel productive when words were too heavy. But now, with time stretched behind me and his absence sharp in the air, I see it for what it really was. Preparation. It wasn't a large garden. We had a modest yard, bordered by old oaks and low fencing. But in his hands, it became something more. He built a stone border by hand, each rock carefully chosen and placed. He mulched it himself, bending over for hours, even when I knew it hurt him to kneel. And he planted things he'd never planted before. Lavender, white tulips, foxglove, a small cherry blossom sapling right in the middle. Won't blossom for a few years, I'd said one afternoon, watching him tamp the soil around its base. I know, he replied softly, wiping dirt from his palms. And then he added, but one day, it will. At the time, I thought it was just hope. Now I wonder if it was a message, a delayed gift. He placed a bench near the back fence, one I'd never seen before. Simple, handmade, carved initials on the side, not just ours. 3 sets. One I didn't recognize. I didn't ask. And he didn't explain. But the way he looked at that bench, like it held more than wood. I should have asked. After he passed, the garden became something I couldn't touch. It felt sacred, like a room still echoing with someone's voice. So I left it exactly as it was. But the strange thing, the cherry blossoms started blooming, small, delicate petals, early, months early. And I knew, deep down, he had left something in that soil, something more than roots. I just hadn't found it yet. The funeral was quiet, small. He wouldn't have wanted anything grand. We kept it simple, just close friends, a few neighbors, and the people who still remembered the warmth in his voice. It was held at the old chapel on Rosewood Lane, the one with the wooden pews that creak when you shift your weight. The one he always said reminded him of childhood. I sat in the front row, clutching a tissue I didn't use. My tears had stopped coming 2 nights earlier. Not because I wasn't grieving, but because the grief had become something else. A dense weight. Too solid for crying. And that's when I saw her. She stood near the back, alone. Slim frame, dark coat, and a wide-brimmed hat that shaded her face. She didn't speak to anyone, didn't sign the condolence book, didn't cry. But when the service ended and the chapel began to empty, she walked slowly down the center aisle. Not toward me, but toward him. The casket had already been lowered the day before, but we'd kept a framed photo of him at the altar. His favorite one, smiling in front of the old bookstore. She stopped in front of it, placed her hand gently on the edge of the stand, closed her eyes, and then she whispered something. I couldn't hear what it was, but the way her fingers trembled, I felt it anyway. It was intimate, familiar. Not the way a distant friend mourns, but the way someone carries someone else inside them. When I approached her, she turned, slowly. Her eyes were red, but not wet. I'm sorry, she said. And before I could ask who she was or how she knew him, she turned and walked out. No name, no explanation. Just silence. The kind that leaves a door wide open in your mind. The kind that makes you question what you thought you knew. I watched her disappear down the gravel path, past the gate, into the afternoon sun. No one else noticed. No one asked. And I didn't mention her to anyone. But something about her stayed with me. The way she touched his picture. The way her presence felt like a memory I didn't recognize. I didn't know it then, but that woman was a thread, a part of the fabric he'd woven behind my back, quietly, gently, and entirely out of view. The envelope arrived 3 days after the funeral. No return address, no handwriting on the outside. Just my name, printed neatly in the center. No stamps, no postmark. Like someone had dropped it off themselves. Inside was a note, only one sentence. If I'm gone, open the flash drive. Tucked beneath the paper was a small USB stick. Plain, silver, no label, but unmistakably his. My hands shook as I held it, not out of fear, but recognition. Because deep down, I knew this wasn't going to be a memory slideshow or some sweet farewell message. This was going to change something. I waited until nightfall. The house was still. I made tea, I didn't drink, and sat at his desk. The one I hadn't touched since he passed. The flash drive clicked into the side of the laptop, and my screen lit up with one single folder. For her. I clicked. Inside, 6 files. 5 were letters. Typed, not handwritten. Each named after a place we'd once been. Crescent Hill, Maple Hollow, the cabin, Fernway, and the garden. But the 6th file was different. A video, titled simply, If I'm Gone. I hesitated. My finger hovered over the mouse. Something in me wanted to turn it off. To preserve the version of him that hadn't kept secrets. To stay in the world where love meant no shadows. But I clicked. And there he was. Sitting in the very chair I was sitting in now. His sweater wrinkled, his hair a little messy. He looked tired, but steady. Like he knew exactly what he was doing. By the time you see this, he began, I'll be gone, and I'm sorry for that. His voice cracked just a little on the word sorry. He paused, took a breath. Then he told me what he'd been holding back. There was more. More than the life we had shared. More than the house, the garden, the routines. There were places I didn't know about. People, documents, and a plan. He didn't explain everything in that video. Not yet. But he gave me the next step. Check the attic, he said. It's all there. Everything you need to know. And then he smiled. Software familiar. The smile I hadn't seen in months. I didn't tell you because I was afraid, he admitted. But I left this. Because I loved you too much not to. The video ended, just like that. I sat frozen, hands still resting on the desk, like I was afraid if I moved, I'd shatter something. And in that stillness, the silence of the house shifted. He hadn't said goodbye, but he had left something. Not just a flash drive, not just secrets. He'd left a beginning. The attic was the one place in the house we rarely touched. It creaked under your feet, smelled like old wood and forgotten summers, and collected dust like it was its job. He always said there wasn't much up there. Old boxes, holiday stuff, things we didn't need but couldn't throw away. But that night, with the flash drive still warm in my pocket, I climbed the narrow stairs and opened the hatch. It was darker than I remembered. Still, thick with the kind of quiet that makes you hold your breath without realizing it. I switched on the single hanging bulb. Its dull yellow glow spread just enough to make shapes out of shadows. Boxes, trunks, a folded chair, a crate of books, and then, against the far wall, a wooden chest. Old. Worn. Like it had been waiting for someone. I walked to it slowly, each step creaking like it might give way. The chest had a latch, but no lock. He wanted me to open it. He expected me to. Inside, I found a stack of journals, leather-bound, labeled by year. I lifted the first one, 2001, the year we got married. Each one was filled with his handwriting. Some pages were long reflections, others were just a few scribbled lines. But it wasn't just journaling, it was documentation. He wrote about places he'd visited that he never told me about, cabins, forests, an old bookstore by the sea. He wrote about people, some by name, some just by initials. There were pages that spoke of regrets. Not infidelities, no, but family secrets, lost connections, things he'd tried to fix, and things he'd chosen to hide. Beneath the journals, documents, legal ones, property deeds, a notarized letter of intention, and tucked between two folded sheets, his real will, dated only 6 months ago, signed, witnessed, stamped, not a copy, the original, and it was nothing like the one his lawyer had shown me during the formal probate meeting. In this will, he left me everything, not just our home. There was a cabin in a place I'd never heard of, a plot of land in his hometown, a trust account, and specific instructions. Tell her to go to the cabin. She'll understand everything there. But understand what? I sank to my knees, the papers spread out around me like puzzle pieces I hadn't known existed. In that dusty attic, surrounded by his ink and intent, it hit me. He'd spent his final year preparing this journey for me. In silence, with care, layer by layer. I thought I knew the whole story, our story, but it turns out, I only knew the part he lived out loud, and the rest? He'd been saving it for me to discover. When I was ready, the lawyer was expecting me. His office was on the 3rd floor of an old building downtown, the kind with brass door handles and carpets that hush your footsteps, the kind of place where time feels slower, where secrets can live a little longer. I didn't make an appointment. I just walked in, the will folded carefully in my purse, and 100 questions rattling in my chest. The receptionist gave me a curious look. I gave her my name. Her eyes widened slightly. She didn't ask why I was there. Instead, she stood, picked up the phone, and said only, "She's here." A few minutes later, a man stepped out into the lobby. Tall, neatly dressed, hair silver at the temples, calm eyes that looked like they'd seen a lot and judged none of it. He extended his hand. "Mrs. Darrow," he said, like he'd known me all his life. I nodded. "I'm Edward Langston. Your husband made arrangements months ago. I've been waiting for you." He led me down a quiet hallway to a warm, wood-paneled room. No fluorescent lights, no cold surfaces. Just a desk, 2 leather chairs, and a wall of books that looked like they'd been chosen for comfort, not show. I handed him the will. He looked it over, didn't flinch, didn't act surprised. He simply said, "This is the original. That's good. That's what we need." He opened a drawer and pulled out a matching copy. Same date, same signature, filed, protected. "He asked me to hold on to this," Edward explained, "and to wait until you were ready. He didn't want it discussed during the formal reading. said it would be premature. Why? I asked. My voice was quiet, not because I was afraid, but because I already felt the truth pressing at the edge of the moment. Because there were things he didn't want to be contested, Edward said gently, things that needed to unfold naturally. He reached for a folder and slid it toward me. Inside were documents I hadn't seen. Bank information, title transfers, letters of intent, maps, and a list. Typed, simple, numbered 1 through 4. At the top, instructions for her. 1. Go to the cabin in Pine Grove. 2. Take the journals with you. 3. Open the box hidden under the bed. 4. Burn nothing, burn nothing. My heart slowed reading that line. I didn't know what it meant, but something about it felt sacred. Edward folded his hands. There's a key for the cabin in the envelope beneath that list. He left it here for safekeeping. He handed me a second envelope, thick and sealed. As I took it, I realized something strange. I wasn't grieving the same way anymore, not the way I had in the days just after his death. Now it felt different, like I wasn't letting go, but being led somewhere. He hadn't left me behind. He was leading me forward, one page at a time. The road to Pine Grove was long, longer than I expected. It stretched through winding hills and old farmland, past fences leaning into time, and forests so dense the sunlight only slipped through in threads. The GPS had no name for the last road, just a gravel path cutting through pines, so narrow I wasn't sure my car should take it. But the map he left me said, keep going. So I did. And when the trees finally opened up, there it was. A small one-story cabin, wooden siding aged to a soft gray, a porch with a single rocking chair, curtains drawn but neat, waiting. It didn't feel abandoned. It felt paused, as if someone had just stepped out for a walk and would be back before sundown. I unlocked the door with the key he'd left. It turned without resistance. The inside smelled like cedar, old paper, and something faintly sweet. The way a place smells when it holds memories and keeps them safe. There were books stacked by the fireplace, a coat still hanging on a peg by the door. His. A few cups in the sink. His handwriting on a note pinned to the fridge. Buy more tea. I stood there for a while, hands at my sides, trying not to cry. Not because I was sad, but because I could feel him here. This was his refuge, the place he came when he needed to breathe, to think, to be. I wandered slowly through the rooms. There weren't many. A small kitchen, a bathroom with cracked tile, and one bedroom with a wooden bed frame and a hand-stitched quilt. I opened drawers carefully, as if the furniture could feel my touch. Most held only simple things, blankets, books, pens, matches. But under the bed, there was a box, just like he said. I pulled it out gently. It was heavier than I expected. Metal. Locked. Taped to the top was a folded note. Don't open this until you've read everything else. And so, I waited. That evening, I built a fire in the stone hearth, just like we used to do on our camping trips when we were younger. The journals he told me to bring sat on my lap. I began to read. And in those pages, I met a version of him I'd never known. A man who wrestled with silence, with love too large to carry easily, with choices that haunted him. I read until the fire burned low, until my eyes ached and the night folded itself around the cabin like a blanket. He came here to write, to make peace, to put it all down for me, for when he no longer could speak it aloud. And as I turned each page, I began to realize, this wasn't just a place. It was a passage, not away from grief, but through it. He didn't leave me alone. He left me the way forward. I found his voice in the forest, not metaphorically, not in the wind or the trees, but in the form of cassette tapes, hidden behind a loose board in the cabin's bookshelf. I only noticed the uneven edge by accident, a sliver of wood that caught the light just wrong. I tugged it gently. It gave way. Behind it, a narrow space, dark, dusty, and inside a shoebox. I pulled it out slowly, feeling the weight shift in my hands. There were 6 tapes, each labeled in the handwriting I knew better than my own. October. Maple Hollow. Emma. Dad. Us. And the last one. Final. No dates, no explanations. I stared at them for a long time, my fingers tracing the ridged plastic, trying to summon the courage to listen. I found an old cassette player tucked into the back of a cabinet. Still working, still full of dust. I cleaned it carefully, almost reverently, and slid in the first tape. It crackled at first. A hum. Then his voice. Software measured. Slightly uncertain. Okay, he began. If you're hearing this, you found them. Good. I froze. It wasn't a goodbye. It wasn't a confession. It was something else entirely. It was a companion. An audio map of the maze he'd been walking alone. He spoke of memories, of a girl named Emma, who used to sit beside him at a summer writing retreat. She'd died young, and it haunted him in ways I never knew. He spoke of his father, a man who loved in quiet ways, but never said the words. He said he feared he had become him. He said that silence could feel safe, until it turned into distance. He spoke of Maple Hollow, a place he'd visited when he was 23, where he'd written poems he never showed anyone. He said that's where he first realized he wanted to be found, but didn't know how to be seen. And then, he spoke of me, of us. The second to last tape was just called Us. He talked about our first apartment, how he used to watch me stir my coffee before I drank it, how he memorized the way I tucked my hair behind my ear when I was nervous, how sometimes he'd lie awake at night, grateful and terrified, because loving me made him feel like he finally had something to lose. I cried, not because it was sad, but because it was real, raw, unedited, unspoken until now. The final tape. I haven't played it yet. It sits on the table waiting, because I need to read more first. I need to finish the pages, understand the garden, open the box. His voice filled the cabin that night, whispering things he could never say out loud. And I listened, not as a widow mourning what was gone, but as someone being led back to what was always there. In this forest, in this cabin, he taught me how to listen again. Not to noise, but to meaning. She returned at sunset, the same woman from the funeral, the one in the dark coat, the wide-brimmed hat. The silence. I heard a knock at the cabin door, soft, like she wasn't sure she wanted me to answer. The forest behind her glowed orange, trees casting long shadows across the porch. She held something in her hands, an envelope. We stared at each other for a moment. Then I opened the door. "I'm sorry," she said again. The same words as before, but this time her voice carried weight, like she'd rehearsed the moment too many times in her mind. I stepped aside, not knowing why. Only knowing I had to. She sat across from me at the small kitchen table. Her fingers trembled as she placed the envelope down. Then she looked up at me. "I think he meant for us to meet," she said. And suddenly, I understood. She looked like him, not exactly, but enough. The same steady eyes, the same pause before speaking. I didn't need her to explain, but she did anyway. "My name is Lillian," she said. "I'm his sister." I felt the breath leave my chest. "He never told me he had a sister," I whispered. She nodded. "He didn't tell anyone." And then she opened the envelope. Inside were copies of old photos, black and white images of children on swings, a boy and a girl playing in a backyard with untrimmed grass and a clothesline in the background. "He was sent away," she said. "Our mother couldn't care for both of us. He went to live with an uncle. I stayed. We weren't allowed to contact each other." Her eyes welled with quiet tears, the kind that don't fall, but shimmer. "We reunited 10 years ago, quietly, on his terms." I listened. "I came to the funeral to say goodbye," she continued, "but I stayed away because I didn't know if you knew." I didn't. He kept it all hidden, but somehow, his silence felt protective, not deceitful. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a folded letter. "He wrote this for you," she said, and told me, if I ever felt brave enough, to deliver it in person. I took it. The paper was warm from her hands, my name written on the front. We sat for a while in that shared quiet, the kind only grief can carve. When she finally stood to leave, I didn't stop her. But I didn't close the door right away either. I watched her walk back down the path through the trees, watched her silhouette shrink into the glow of dusk. I opened the letter after dark. It was short. He wrote about her, about how finding her gave him peace, about how he didn't want to disrupt the life we had built, but also didn't want to die with that part of himself unspoken. And at the end, he wrote this: "She's family too, and now, so are you." And just like that, another thread wove itself into the fabric of who he truly was. Not a lie, not a betrayal, just a part of the story he saved for later. The garden had always been his sanctuary, but now I understood. It was also a message. When I returned from the cabin, I walked straight to the backyard. The cherry blossom tree stood taller than before, its branches stretching skyward, petals fluttering like whispers in the breeze. The bench was still there. So were the carved initials. Ours. And the third set I now knew belonged to her. Lillian. I sat down, and for the first time in weeks, I listened. Birdsong, distant wind chimes, the hush of leaves rubbing against each other, and then a scrape, software from beneath my feet. I looked down, something small, metallic, embedded just under the dirt near the base of the tree. I knelt, my hands trembling, as I brushed the soil aside. And there it was. A small tin box, rusted at the edges, sealed with string and a wax stamp. A time capsule, inside, photos, notes, a tiny fabric elephant, one I'd sewn for him years ago and thought he'd lost. A pressed daisy, a dog collar from a pet we buried on a rainy Thursday 15 years ago, and at the very bottom, a folded piece of paper. For when she's ready. I unfolded it slowly. It was a list, short, just 5 lines. 1. You always made the best soup. 2. I read every book you recommended. 3. I watched you sleep when I couldn't find peace. 4. I saved every note you left me on the fridge. 5. I loved you more than I ever said, so I planted it instead. Planted it. The garden wasn't just a distraction. It was a language. Every plant, every stone, every placement. A conversation. Lavender, for devotion. Tulips, for forgiveness. Foxglove, for secrets kept and finally told. And the cherry blossom, for rebirth. For what comes after loss. I wept. But it was different now. Not the kind of weeping that empties you, the kind that fills. Because I realized he hadn't left me in silence. He just spoke a different way. And this garden was his final letter, written not with ink, but with intention. I spent hours there, touching each plant, tracing his steps in the soil, letting every bloom whisper back to me what he hadn't known how to say in words. And by the time the sun began to set, casting gold across the blossoms, I understood something deeply, quietly. Love doesn't always arrive the way we expect. Sometimes it grows, patiently, steadily, rooted beneath everything else, waiting for us to finally see it bloom. He chose me, quietly, consistently, even when I didn't see it. In the stillness that followed those days, after the cabin, the garden, Lillian, I found myself sitting in the living room, staring at the space he used to occupy. Not mourning this time, but remembering, noticing. All the little things that once felt ordinary now shimmered with meaning. The chipped mug he always fixed my tea in. The way he'd fold my sweaters, not quite the way I liked, but always carefully. The sticky notes he used to leave with reminders. Pick up milk, call your sister, water the ferns. It wasn't poetry, but it was love, folded into routine. In one of his journals, I found a line that hadn't made sense until now. Choosing her was never loud, it was daily. And he was right. There was never some grand romantic gesture. He didn't buy me jewelry or write long letters during anniversaries, but he came back with flowers on Tuesdays. He always saved the last piece of cake. He made sure my tires were checked before every road trip. When we argued, because of course we did, he always stayed in the room. He never slammed doors, never left things unfinished. And when I look at the quiet plans he made, the way he built a trail of breadcrumbs for me to follow long after he was gone, it becomes impossible to deny. He didn't just love me, he trusted me, he prepared for me, to understand, to carry what came next, to receive what he couldn't give while alive. And maybe, just maybe, he knew I wouldn't be ready while he was still here. He chose to wait, even if it meant I wouldn't hear the truth until after the silence set in. He chose to leave me everything, not just the house, not just the garden or the journals or the cabin tucked away beneath pine trees. He left me the whole story, his fears, his guilt, his regrets, and most of all, his intentions. He chose to give me the version of himself he couldn't carry in daylight, the version that had to be assembled, piece by piece, by hands that still trembled with grief. And I chose him too. Not just the man I married, but the man I met through his echoes. The man who made mistakes, but never stopped weaving love into the spaces I hadn't yet noticed. He didn't need to say goodbye. He'd already said everything, just in his own way. Forgiveness was the hardest part. Not of him, but of myself. For not seeing, for not asking, for assuming that silence meant indifference instead of overwhelm. There were nights when the weight of everything he left behind sat heavy on my chest. Not the material things. Those were just wood, paper, metal. It was the decisions. The detours in his life that I hadn't walked with him. The family he never introduced. The quiet plans he made without me. Even with the letters, the tapes, the flowers blooming in their coded language, part of me still asked, why not tell me? Why let me stand in the dark when he could have just flipped on the light? But then I'd think about that final year. The way he stared out windows longer than usual. The way he held my hand a little tighter before bed. The way he'd open his mouth sometimes like he wanted to say something, but would just press his lips together and offer a quiet smile instead. He was trying, in the only way he knew how. And isn't that what we all do? Try, imperfectly, to carry love alongside fear, truth alongside protection? I sat with that for a long time. There was no dramatic moment of peace, no deep exhale under a full moon, just small shifts. One night, I made his favorite soup again, the one with the bay leaf I always forget to remove. I set a place for him at the table, not out of denial, but out of thanks. Thank you for the life we built. Thank you for not being perfect. Thank you for giving me more than I asked for, even if it came after you were gone. Forgiveness came in teaspoons, in folded laundry, in the soft sigh I let out when I found one more note tucked in the back of a drawer. If you're reading this, you found it all. I knew you would. I smiled through tears, because I had found it all, and I was still here, still standing, still loving a man who made me learn him twice, once while he was alive, and once more after he was gone. Not everyone gets a second chance at understanding, but somehow he gave me that. And now, I had to decide what to do with it. How to carry his story, and mine. How to turn a silent goodbye into something that still spoke, every single day. I water the garden every morning now. It's not just about the plants anymore. It's about remembering, and honoring, and choosing, every day, to keep something alive. Not just what grows from the soil, but what grew between us. So much has happened since that night. The night when silence filled the house like fog. The night I realized he was gone, and that he'd said nothing. At least, that's what I thought. But now I know the truth. He did speak, in gestures, in hidden drawers, in cassette tapes, in letters buried beneath seasons of grief and soil. He spoke to me in a language I hadn't yet learned to hear, the language of after. He left me everything, not just in name, but in intention. He left me places he never showed, stories he never finished, and people he loved in secret but trusted me to understand. He left me questions, yes, but also the tools to find the answers. And maybe that's the most profound thing we can leave behind. Not instructions, not declarations, but trust. He trusted that I'd still be standing, still listening, still willing to walk the path even after it became lonely. And through that, he gave me a second chance to know him, to forgive him, to carry him, not as a shadow, but as light. This story isn't just about grief. It's about the quiet ways love can endure, even when the voice that carried it goes silent. It's about how people can surprise us, not with what they say, but with what they leave behind when the noise is gone. And it's about memory, not the kind frozen in photographs, but the kind we live with, that we grow with. I still miss him, but now, when I walk through the garden, I don't feel his absence. I feel his presence. Subtle, rooted, blooming. Thank you for walking with me through this journey, for staying through the silences, for breathing through the heaviness, and for trusting me to carry this story to the end. If this story touched you, even in a small way, I hope you'll come back. There are more stories waiting, more echoes worth chasing, more love, hiding quietly in unexpected places. Until next time, keep something close, keep something true, and never forget that even in goodbye, there can still be a beginning. Good night, and I'll see you soon. End of script. Good night.